I think we're ready to start now. Do we have the roving mics? We do have the roving mics. Yeah. Yeah.
Table 10.
The facilitator for Table 10. One of the citizens at this table has a question, and another citizen also has another question. The first question is, how are PRSI contributions counted? Does it differ for a full or part-time person?
Hello, I'm a citizen on Table 10. My question is for Mr. Moran. It was mentioned that the gender difference was big because a person's contribution rate might have dropped, so they wouldn't have a full service. My question is, if a person's rate only allows for a reduced contribution and the figure of €100 per week was mentioned, why can't that person apply for a non-contributory pension and only be down €10 on the full contributory rate?
Okay.
The same age thing.
Yeah. Maybe I'll take that question if you want to take the first question. The simple answer is that they can. So they could apply for the non-contributory pension, but on that basis, first of all, there would be still a dip in the income, but also the pension that they would get would be based not just on their own income, but on the income of their partner or spouse, and that can be a challenging situation. So you're absolutely right, that option is available, but it would still not necessarily deal with the fact that people would be losing out income because their incomes would therefore be based on the income of somebody else. That makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah, in relation to the first question on PRSI contributions and how they're counted, it depends on what your earnings are, and there are different eligibility bands according to how much PRSI you pay. And depending on what band of payment you pay, that determines what your pension band is. So for some people, they might get the full rate contribution because they pay the maximum number in, but for people who are on a lower wage, they may not pay enough in to get the full social insurance contribution, and they may fall into one or two of lower bands, in which case they'll get lower social insurance pension back. So it's related to the level of wage you had, which determines the amount of the contribution that you pay in. So it's tiered, in other words. Yeah, does that make sense?
Thank you very much.
I am the facilitator for Table 7. The citizens at this table have two questions and a request. The first question to the panel. A member at Table 7 is quite alarmed to hear that age discrimination kicks in at late 40s. Have you any recommendations to employers to address and reverse this negative thinking, especially in areas of high unemployment, e.g. the Southeast, or any recommendations for economic incentives that could be implemented? The second question regarding non-contributory pensions. If a person is on the non-contributory pension and they take up employment, what happens with their payment? And the third thing is a request, can the citizens at the table have a copy of the National Positive Ageing Strategy? Please.
Maybe to respond to the age discrimination issue, there was a report published by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform last year called Fuller Working Lives. It actually had a number of proposals around trying to get across to employers the economic benefits in terms of employing older people, such as, for example, if you're an employer who's employing somebody, the PRSI rate that you'll be paying as an employer will be different, will be more beneficial. There's also other ideas around training programs and supports that we can be putting in place. So I think that's definitely something that we have to be doing. And I think getting those, I suppose it touches back to the last point I made, the recommendations in a report, when they'll be implemented is a different thing, and there's no deadline, there's no targets. And I think, again, that's part of the challenge, I think, with policy in this country a lot of the times. We actually do come up with some really good ideas, we just don't implement them.
Yeah. I mean, there are some really good examples in Ireland of employers who have taken on positive approaches to breaking that type of age discrimination. Like off the top of my head, Tesco's, Marks and Spencer's, TK Maxx have all worked with local employment companies to take on particular projects where they target older workers and can see and then stress the benefits for it. One of the policy initiatives that would be useful there is for the Department of Social Protection and their broader activation strategy to make a specific target for the employment rate of older workers as a national policy goal. And I think that would translate them back into actions that would, be things like working with particular groups of employers to get them to take it on in a positive way, maybe even with some incentives for retraining and things like that. In relation to the question on what happens if you're on a non-contributory pension and you get a job, the earnings from that employment would be means tested against the non-contributory pension because it is a means tested pension. And that's one of the reasons to look at all the anomalies in relation to the barriers to the contributory pension, because one of the fantastic things about being eligible to the contributory pension is that you can work and maintain your full contributory pension. So it really it enables people a fuller range of choices in relation to how they might manage their income in older life. So that's one thing about that. Yeah.
Yes.
I am the facilitator for Table 1. A question arises from the table. It's for the panel as a whole. Should relative carers or foster carers be entitled to collect stamps towards obtaining a contributory pension despite not being employed?
I suppose just to respond very simply, yes, they should, and I think it goes back to what we define as a contribution. I mean, even the phrase, the contribution that we use around your PRSI stamps, we link that to your contribution is based on the fact that you're in employment and paid employment and you're working and you're making contribution. If you're a carer or you've taken time out of the workforce to look after a family member, you're not making a contribution. You're out of the workforce and you're separate almost. We would argue very strongly, no, you're absolutely making contribution. You're just making contribution in a different way and in a way that is undervalued, frankly, by society and certainly undervalued by the economy. How we would do that, I think we need to talk about it a little bit more, but certainly as a principle, we would certainly want to see that happen.
But it would involve a very fundamental change in the law, because social insurance now is paid by employees as distinct from anybody else. You have to be an employee.
Oh no, it wouldn't be an easy thing to do. It certainly couldn't be done overnight. But I think it's about once we decide that we want to put a genuine value on the contribution and the work, because it is work. It doesn't happen to be not picking up a salary and a pay slip for it, but it's certainly work. When we want to, we can figure out a way to put a value on that and recognise those people, because also it dissuades people from taking up those kind of caring roles because they know they're not going to get a state pension about it. And we've discussed at the previous week, and I think that one of the other gentlemen here highlighted as well, the enormous contribution family carers make in this country. And there was a carer who spoke at the previous weekend who talked about the economic impact on his life, and he wasn't looking for a very fancy retirement package. He just wanted a decent retirement package, and I think we need to figure out a way to ensure we can deliver it.
Yeah, and it relates to that wider question about how we understand work as well, and the reality that there are lots of new forms of work and old forms of work that we traditionally don't see as either self-employment or employment. Some of it is paid, some of it isn't paid. And that's one of the great challenges for trying to reimagine our social insurance system to include more people in it who either, like that, are doing work that's presently unpaid but should be valued, or indeed who are doing work that's paid but that they don't have a formal employment status, yet neither are they really typically the original type of self-employment that we thought of, and they don't have a way into our social insurance system at the moment. So the same type of policy legislation change could well include both types of work being brought into the social insurance system.
Anybody?
Judge, I'm the facilitator at Table 12, and one of the citizens has the following question for the panel. Should the government legislate to employers against compulsory retirement?
I would say that, but I would say that they should, and there's legislation actually in the Oireachtas at the moment that's going through to abolish mandatory retirement clauses. It's legislation that's flawed, and I think the Justice raised this point earlier on today when we were talking about how you would affect those contracts that are already existing, where your mandatory retirement age is linked to your pension, or it's written into other factors in your contract. So it's not an easy thing to do, but we think it absolutely has to be done. And I suppose that the argument I was trying to make was that we're letting employers tell you that at the age of 65 you've nothing more left to give. And I suppose we've talked a little bit about the financial aspect of it, but talking to our members who've brought this up, it can be really emotional. You're told at 65, go home. We've had people who didn't tell their co-workers that they were finishing up on the Friday, which was their birthday, because they didn't want anybody to know, so they went home by themselves. We've had people who lost friends because your friendship and your circle is often so tightly wound up with your job and your place of employment. So there's a financial aspect to it as well, but there's a social aspect to it. And to sit across the table from some fella in HR and be told you're turning 65, it's time for you to go home, it's a hard thing to hear for people.
Justin, is that a private member's bill?
It is, yes.
A private member's bill, yeah.
I am the facilitator for Table 2, and I ask this question on behalf of some of the members of the table. The question is from Mary Murphy, and the members of the table would like to know, how do you propose to redistribute the $2.4 billion that the state subsidises, and how to do so that the system is not as top-heavy? Also, how would you suggest to address the age gap? And finally, based on this question, can you make suggestions on how the members may ballot on this tomorrow?
Yeah. Away you go there, Mary.
Oh, jeepers. Okay, well, one way of making it less top-heavy, I'm not making a specific proposal, I'm just giving you an illustration of it, would be that you could decide, for example, at the moment people can avail of the tax credit that they get for private sector pension investment at the top rate of tax that they pay. And that creates a real anomaly. So it's more advantageous for the higher paid worker than the lower paid worker. You could standard rate that, so it's the same advantage to all workers. That would save you a considerable amount of the tax expenditure. Yet it would retain some incentive to invest in private market, but it would be equal for everybody. And for example, you might save up to $1 billion doing that, and you could reinvest that into addressing, for example, the care anomalies in relation to the barriers that are there for women to be covered fully by the social insurance coverage. And that could get you a long way to getting a more universal comprehensive social insurance pension for virtually everybody over the next maybe 10 years. So you could address things like the degree to which women's care contribution isn't fully accommodated in the present rules for social insurance coverage. You could spend the money you would save from the tax expenditures directly on very targeted changes that would pull in other people into the social insurance system. And you could get 100% coverage relatively accessibly in a tiered way that way, with that kind of money. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Mary, can I ask, has there been debate about the huge level? I'm absolutely gobsmacked when I heard the figure 2.4 billion. Has there been debate about the size of that level of tax relief on pension contributions?
Yeah, there has been extensive debate, both more policy, political debate, and obviously it's the subject of academic coverage. And in fact, Micheál Collins, who was here earlier on, has written extensively about it himself. And there are very specific policy proposals with different ideas about how you might enact reform in that area, with various degrees of reform. But certainly there are policy proposals on the table from a wide range of organisations. I can certainly email some of them to people if people are interested in them. So it is possible to do it. And I suppose how you would put it on a ballot paper, I think I won't advise on that, because I don't want to give you the wrong advice. But it could be about that in a targeted way, that you distribute from the tax expenditure directly into funding an increase in social insurance coverage. It could be something like that.
Yes.
Afternoon. I'm the facilitator at table 14, and there's two questions from this table. A lady is working in the 70s and 80s and is paying stamps, then stops working to raise her family and continues to sign on once a year. When she reaches retirement age, what is her entitlement? If someone is a carer like Eamon from the previous weekend, what is the situation regarding counting of stamps PRSI for that person?
Justin, would you
to take the first question, I suppose the lady concerned, it would be based on the length of time she was in the workforce. So she was in the 19th, and relating to what time she decided to leave the workforce and retire. So let's say hypothetically she decides to retire in 2017. They will look at all of the PRSI contributions she made from when she started in, let's say, 1974, and they will add them up. And then they will divide that by 1974 from 2017, which is 43, I think. My sums aren't great, but they'll divide it by 43, and that'll work out your average contributions. And then they'll go to a table they have, which sets out the pension you get for that. So if you have an average contributions of 48 or more, you get the full state pension. Between 40 and 47, you get almost a full state pension. Then it kind of goes down like groups of 10s and down to a minimum of 10. So if you have 10, I think it's about 95, 96 euros is your full contribution, or your payment. One thing worth bearing in mind when we talk about pension increases, because I don't think it came up and sometimes people are quite surprised by it. When we talk about, say, an increase in the pension of €5, that's an increase in the full pension rate. The people who are on the lower rates, they don't get €5. They get a proportion of the €5. So if you're on, say, 23, 24 contributions and the state pension goes up €5, you don't get €5. You'll probably get around €3 something, maybe close to €4. And if you're at the very bottom, you could be getting €1.20, €1.30. So when you hear people talking about a €5 pension increase, it can be frustrating and hard to take. The second question, I'm sorry, I didn't actually make it out.
It's to do with the carers and how their contributions or lack of, they're not paying social welfare, how are they treated?
Yeah, take the same woman, okay? Say if she had been caring for 20 years, the 20 years that she would have been caring are disregarded, is the word that they use, from the average calculation that they make. So instead of the 43 years being the average, the calculation, they would disregard the years she spent caring from the calculation, and then they would make the calculation. So it's not that she gets credits for the time she's caring, it's that the time she's caring isn't counted in the calculation for what her average pension contribution is. Now, a lot of organisations would say that that's a bit of a meanly way to do it, that it would be more progressive to give her credit for the actual years that she's actually caring, because that would be more meaningful in making sure she got a bigger social insurance pension at the end of the day. And obviously that's one, there's a cost to that, but it would be quite a meaningful way to address the pensions gap in relation to gender. Yeah.
Can I just say that this anomaly, for want of a better word, is well explained in both of your papers.
Yes.
Yeah, you should read the papers, both Justin's paper and Emily's paper. It's well explained in both of them.
Judge, the table 5 have a suggestion that from the age of 60, people should be made aware of their social welfare contribution entitlements, private pension entitlements, and on an annual basis, and educated on what it means. And the citizens at table 5 would just want to make this point. With regard to respecting the dignity of older people, you rarely see positive images of older people in the media.
Just to say, I strongly agree with the first suggestion. You can, at any point, you can write to the Department of Social Protection, you can ask how many stamps you've accumulated. The burden is on you to do that. It's free service, you can write to them, they'll send it back to you. A lot of the people who will contact us, they're only starting to think about their entitlement at 63, 64, 65, to enable them to know earlier that you could maybe be missing out on a full state pension, I think is a really smart idea. They can then buy additional voluntary contributions. They can kind of, buy contributions to boost their state pension. So that's something I think that should be definitely considered. And just that, but yes, I just missed the last point. It's certainly on positive aging, and it's an issue that comes up from our our members. I don't know if people ever, if you're watching coverage on, I don't want to single out our state broadcaster, but I just watch a lot of RTE. A lot of the times the picture when it's about older people is these two older women's hands. That's the screenshot. It's not showing the, I suppose, the vitality and the contribution, the fulfilling life that many older people have. And I think that's something that we maybe not deal with legislation or policy proposals, but certainly I think that our broadcasters and our media should be doing more to realise that not everybody who's in their 70s and 80s is going to be in a nursing home or in home care or going to need supports. Many of them are making enormous contributions. And actually part of it is we don't think of them as older people, because when they're 75 and they're working hard or they're president or whatever, we don't think of them as older people, but they are, and we should just celebrate that.
Thank you very much.
I'm the facilitator for table 13. The citizens at this table have 2 questions and 1 comment. The first question is for Emily Logan. In your paper on page 6, you have a recommendation in bold which reads, "The Commission has recommended that the homemaker scheme be applied retrospectively by the state in order to ensure equitable access to the contributory state pension. Has there been any analysis as to how much this would cost?" The citizens at this table also note that this inequitable access to the contributory state pension scheme seems contrary to Article 41.2.1 of the Constitution, which expressly recognises the contribution of women to the common good through their work at home. The final question is, the Minister for Public Reform is currently talking with public servant unions in respect of pay restoration for public servants. Is there any similar intention to do so in respect of restoration of the pension levy?
In answer, to that,
yes,
in answer to that first question, on the homemaker scheme was introduced in 2012, and our concern is in relation to the inequity that exists if it's not applied retrospectively. So there's a gap, I think it's before 1994. A bit like Mary was talking about earlier, that
yes.
there's a gap that will translate into people's pensions.
It was introduced in 1994, I think.
1994.
Yeah.
And we're suggesting that if it is not included retrospectively, that it will continue through, that inequity will continue through into pensions. In terms of costing, no, we haven't included a costing in our report, but there is costings available, and we can make those available to Sharon.
And then there was the suggestion about Article 42, the place of the woman in the home. That might be a basis for proceedings in the High Court, challenging the constitutionality of some provision of the Social Welfare Acts. I don't know. Just a suggestion.
Thank you for that. Use that constitutional thing to test any of that legislation.
And maybe just then to mention on the last issue that was brought up, the pension levy.
Oh yes.
The simple answer is no, not in the same way that we're seeing for public sector pay restoration.
Yeah, no.
It's a live political discussion. There are people making that argument politically, but in terms of a kind of social partnership, people sitting down around a table and trying to renegotiate back out the pension levy as it was applied on private pensions, that's not happening, I'm afraid.
Very good. Yeah. I'll take one more question, just this, and then we'll have to move on. Thank you.
Sorry, this is not actually a question, it's more of a statement from all the citizens at table 9, so I'm just reading it out on their behalf. It is with great disappointment, noting the current inaction by successive governments, that the citizens of Table 9 recommend that the recommendations of the National Positive Ageing Strategy 2013 be urgently implemented under the direction with clear deadlines of a senior civil servant, and action and effective implementation needs to begin within 6 months.
We'll make a
Thank
note
you.
of that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I mean, you will have been conscious of the emphasis that Justin made in relation to implementation. Yeah, and before the day is out, you'll be hearing more about implementation, I think. It is a problem. There are lots of policies out there, but they're not being implemented. So we'll call it a day on this particular session, and I want to express my gratitude to Mary, to Emily, and to Justin. It's been very, very helpful. And we're going to now move on straight away to the next session, which is session 7, and followed by session 8, and then our coffee break comes at 4 o'clock. That's the good news. Thank you very, very much.